was formed to address a air pollution challenge in the wine industry, which for those of you who haven't heard any part of this presentation is probably a bit of a surprise. It just doesn't fit in with our bucolic image of rolling vineyards and real cute tasting rooms. We don't think of the wine industry as being a polluting industry. But half of the wine that's manufactured in the U.S. is made in the Central Valley of California, over half. And that wine is produced in very, very large, what are called tank farms. And this is characteristic of that. Look, that's a minivan down at the end of the corridor. These are tanks that are 100,000 gallons in fermenting capacity or greater. And when wine is made, what happens is the grapes are crushed, yeast and some nutrients are thrown in, and in the process of forming wine, copious amounts of carbon dioxide are released, and along with that is stripped a sizable fraction of the ethanol or alcohol that is produced in the process of making wine. That ethanol is a volatile organic or reactive organic. They have different names as an air pollutant, and it contributes to the formation of ozone or smog. And again, it may be somewhat of a surprise unless you've spent time in the summer and in the fall in the Central Valley of California, but the Central Valley of California has the second worst ozone air pollution problem in the U.S., second only to this basin here, the Los Angeles basin. So it turns out to be a real issue. There are no means of capturing those ethanol, or there were no means of capturing those ethanol emissions that come from what's called primary wine fermentation, when the yeast are active. And wineries constitute 3 of the top 10 sources of stationary sources of volatile organics in the Central Valley. In the very end of 2005, the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District, which is the district with the jurisdiction of southern San Joaquin Valley, imposed a technology forcing regulation saying that wineries had to reduce their emissions of ethanol by about 35%. It was technology forcing because there were no viable controls for doing that. And my business partner, Marcy Norkin, and I got together with an idea of an approach that would be very specific to this unique source, which is a batch process that's uncharacteristic of other manufacturing approaches. What we did is we were familiar with what would be the conventional means of controlling emissions of ethanol vapors, and none of those were going to be acceptable to winemakers. None of them would be compatible with the winemaking process. Most of them would, in some way, deteriorate the quality of wine that was being produced. So the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District, which is the acronym there in the first quote, after they passed their regulation in 2007, they came back and said, there is no reasonably available control technology for this particular source. But they kept the rule on the books that there had to be a 35% reduction, or that the wineries had to purchase offset emission credits and basically pay to pollute. We've been working very closely now with the EPA because there was a revision in one of the rules of the San Joaquin Valley, and we said, well, wait a minute, we have a technology that has been shown to work, can work, and the EPA is now required that the San Joaquin Valley consider our technology as they go forward looking at potential best available control technology. So this just happened and was really a major kicker for us. But now I want to show you some of what's involved in being an entrepreneur on a bootstrap budget. This literally is how we got started. We had an idea of a way of capturing these emissions, but we had to basically replicate the process because it's an imperfect system, it's an imperfect chemical mixture. There really is no fundamental chemistry that you can rely on to get there. This turns out to be Marcy's kitchen. So we got bottled carbon dioxide, we metered it in about the same process rate that would happen during normal wine fermentation, and we initially started with neutral spirits to see if we could just make this system work and capture it and what that resultant would be like. This is very different than distillation. Now, there were a couple of times when workers at Marcy's house came by and saw this in the kitchen, and repeatedly we had, "Oh, I don't see that." So we went from that. We got bigger scale. We went to a garage. We left the kitchen and went into a garage where we were actually doing fermentations in 100-gallon or so vats. Again, to prove to ourselves that this could work and that we captured a fairly high alcohol content byproduct. One of our first interactions with the regulatory agency was with the TTB, and we called them because we were trying to get approval to do our first full-scale test in a commercial winery. So we started out with some very clear objectives, because what we were trying to do had never really been done in pollution control before, and had this unique source that we had to work with. So we had to be compatible with winemaking. We were going to be capturing a high ethanol content material. We wanted low O&M costs, and we wanted the energy used to be very low because it's a premium in the wine industry where they have brownouts and blackouts all of the time during the wine time period. So now, this is our first prototype, which was conducted in a winery. So one of our first interactions, and this took about 6 months to complete, is we had to get approval from the TTB to collect what we were collecting. Now, most wineries can only work with alcohol products that get up to 15 to 18% alcohol. We were generating something that was closer to 40 or 50% alcohol. And so initially we started with the wine division. They were very helpful, based up in San Francisco. And when we told them what our kitchen and garage experiments had produced, they said, well, we can't regulate you at the wine division. We're going to have to kick you over to the revenue and spirits division in Cincinnati. So we went up to Cincinnati, and we were trying to get approval with the material that we collected to work with it. Well, there was no bin to fit us into. There was no regulatory box that we fit into. So we put in our application to the TTB, and we got somebody who was, a GS9 initially. Person came back and said, I'm sorry, we can't act on this. This is above our pay grade. Well, we kept getting bumped up all the way to GS15, and the GS15 finally said, all right, we'll give you your permit to go into the winery and do this as long as you cordon off your activity, because you're a higher alcohol content than that winery is allowed to work with, and so long as you destroy the product that you collect. Well, I thought this was crazy, because we were actually looking at being able to collect a lot of alcohol, and it has value. It has real value. So, being somewhat forward, I wrote an email, and this was just before the election in 2008. And I said, wait a minute, we've got a solution to a pollution problem. We're going to be collecting potentially a lot of ethanol. You're telling us that we have to take this ethanol, remove it from the winery, ship it by truck polluting along the way to an incinerator somewhere, take it to an incinerator, put natural gas into this, fire the thing up, and pollute more at the incinerator, and lose a product that USDA and Department of Energy are trying desperately to collect. So we got a call back from somebody from the senior executive service out above GS15 from Cincinnati saying, okay, Steve, I get it. If we say no to you, this is in the New York Times tomorrow, right? And I said, well, that wasn't my intent, but that's a great idea. He said, don't worry, we're ahead of you here. We've got a committee together, political appointees in DC. We've got the revenue division here in Cincinnati and the wine division in San Francisco. We're going to make it happen. So that was, the start of what turned out has continued to be a very good relationship with them. But a lot of that was just out of our directness and openness in approaching the agency. So finally we went back, we had to make some additional measurements because there was no literature in the wine literature on the rate at which carbon dioxide and ethanol are released. And we wrote a 100-page report that we were really proud of, and we wanted the Treasury Department to respond to it because we're saying, well, we're novices about this. We're naive. We know you want to tax this if we have it in any way distributed as a product, whether that be a fuel or we were considering it as a spirit because this has got some really interesting flavor characteristics. And so we made an appointment to go up and see the people at the wine division in San Francisco. Now, again, this was all out of naivete. We've talked to tons of winemakers since then and said, have you ever visited the TTB in San Francisco? And they take a step or two back and say, what, are you crazy? We don't want to draw any attention to us from because they're the tax guys. They said, let me give you an analogy. That'd be like you knocking on the doors of the IRS in DC saying, hey, I want to talk to you about taxes. So what have we done? Well, it turns out that we thought we're engineers, so we thought we'd be producing a tractor fuel, something that we could spin down. We knew we had a high alcohol content. Winemakers pivoted us and said, if you can capture this stuff, it's been kind of the holy grail in the wine industry for a couple thousand years because we lose all of our aromatics during this fermentation process. And if you capture the ethanol, you're going to be capturing these flavor and aroma compounds that go with it. We designed this from the ground up for this particular application and met all of our other design goals. So at this point, coming into the PortTech, what we had is we've got one product that we have developed and are selling. It was a spin-off from the research that we did that is a monitor of where wineries are in the fermentation process. And then we have our passive alcohol system, which is the system that recovers the ethanol during primary wine fermentation. Wine production is definitely a global industry. The U.S. takes great pride, as it should, in its wine production now, but relative to the EU, I think we're about 1/6 of the production of EU, and we're really comparable to Australia, New Zealand combined, China, South American production. So there is a lot of opportunity to expand this.